Okay, so in this video, we're going to verify that the following equation is an identity. Cosecant of theta equals cotangent of theta plus 1 over cosine of theta plus sine of theta. Now, these verifying problems, there are infinite different ways to approach them. So even if you didn't solve this the same way as me, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong. There is one major rule, and that is you can only manipulate one side of the equation. And so you need to pick which side of the equation do you want to manipulate. I like to pick the more complicated side because by picking the more complicated side, I can simplify it. It is much harder or more difficult to take a simplified side and make it less simple. So I'm going to pick the more complicated side, which is that cotangent of theta plus 1 over cosine of theta plus sine of theta. And I'm going to try to make this more simple. The first thing that I notice is that this cotangent of theta can be rewritten as cosine over sine. So I'm going to do that. Cosine of theta over sine of theta. And you know what? While I'm at it, since I already know that my denominator needs to be sine, why don't I rewrite that as sine over sine? Sine over sine is 1, and so I am allowed to do that. And at this time, I won't mess with anything else. So now I'm in a position where I want to start simplifying this, right? So I have two fractions with a common denominator. And so I could simplify that. I could add them together. So let's go ahead and do that. And when they have a common denominator, you keep that denominator. So they're going to have a denominator of sine. And in their numerator, they're going to be cosine of theta plus sine of theta. And I haven't messed with anything else yet. And so I will keep that cosine of theta plus sine of theta. Now, this is pretty cool. This is pretty cool because I have a cosine plus sine of theta in my numerator here. And then I have a cosine plus sine of theta in my numerator of my denominator. And so they're going to cancel out. This is like an invisible divided by 1. So we have a complex fraction here. And let's just do a side note. This isn't our answer. We're going to do a side note. And let's do that side note right here. The way that we could rewrite this would be cosine of theta plus sine of theta divided by sine of theta divided by cosine of theta plus sine of theta over 1. And when we cross multiply, we'd multiply these two things together, and so we'd get cosine of theta plus sine of theta. And we'd multiply these two things together, and we'd get sine of theta times cosine of theta plus sine of theta. And this cancels out. And remember that sine is in our denominator, so we have to keep it. And so all of this turns into 1 over sine of theta. And 1 over sine of theta is cosecant of theta. And that's what we were looking for. And so we just verified that it is an identity by only manipulating one side of the equation and making it look like this side of the equation.